Habari gani, karibuni, asanteni. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, this is Kumbukeni. I am your host, Nduko, countering the false narrative that Western media has propagated against Africa and Africans for too long, and telling our narrative from our own perspective, determining for ourselves. I'm excited about today's conversation. We're going to be talking about the fact that we are breaking free. And we'll talk about neocolonialism, our struggle that has been. I was just talking to my guests before we came on, and I'm saying it's been a 400 plus struggle, pursuit of liberation. So what has that been? What has that looked like? And then our current fight against neocolonialism. We'll talk a little bit about Magufuli and Ubulungisa in Africa. As you all know, those of you who've listened to Mama Kanyisile, Ubulungisa is bringing balance, right? Africa has been imbalanced and we need to bring back balance. So we'll start with John Seremani. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and then we'll go ahead to our sister.
Hey, hi.
Karibu.
Yeah, my name is John Seremani. I am a history enthusiast and a self-proclaimed constitutional expert. But anyway, yes, I'm an author and a writer and also in construction. Cheers.
I'm glad to hear actually that you're a self-proclaimed constitutional expert. Yeah, because I'll be reaching out for some stuff. So thank you for saying it that way. All right, go ahead, sis. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I go by the name NothingKE, and the reason for it is there's nothing happening in the nation and Africa at large, and it's about time we turn that nothing into something. So we are going into those dark alleys where democracy died, and we're shining the light until Africa is free. I'm totally convinced that Africa is the future superpower, and we will no longer sit on our potential. We are here to break free. Thank you.
Nice. She is starting on a powerful note, so you all better put on your seatbelts. Okay, so let's start with the question. As we were talking before, how did you start being an activist? When did you all decide to stop going along to get along? How was that journey for you? Let's start with NothingKE.
Okay, for me, it was pretty easy for a simple reason that my father taught us Kenyan history on the road. So I've been to many parts of Kenya, and I've also been able to travel outside. But in Kenya, when we would be on school breaks, he would spare an entire week to take us on a road trip where he taught us the history and he taught us who we are, and we owned it. And because of that exposure, I would ask a lot of questions. I would ask about my skin color. I asked about my hair, but the way he explained it made me own up who I am, made me love my hair. I still wear my hair, and I love it. And then when it came to a global perspective, as we were exposed to different parts of the world, I started asking the question, how come Africa is not developed? What is going on? And that became a question that made me watch closely what leadership was doing. And I understood that it is possible to change. So even as I call myself NothingKE, I've looked at different areas from education, sports, culture, healthcare, and unemployment, how to address it. And I have this own paper I've consulted widely, I've written my own nuggets, and I tried reaching to the previous government, and of course they ignored. I wrote to different county governors. I have receipts from G4S of the mails I sent them. I was telling them what they should do in their county. A few people implemented the bare minimum. Of course, zero acknowledgement, but I was not looking for that. What I needed was change, and I realized it can be done, but there's no willingness. And then whenever I travel, I felt like an outsider. And there was a lot of questions about Africa. that gave me the interest to go to different parts of Africa. And if you hear me talk about the liberation, I no longer just talk about my home country, but I look at it in terms of Africa has to be free. Thank you.
Nice. I'm glad you said that. Malcolm X talks about that. Nkrumah talks about that. He understood that Ghana cannot be independent by itself. It had to be the whole of Africa, because as long as the other nations were not independent, Ghana was at risk of falling back into the hands of the colonialists. John Seremani, how did your journey go up for you to get here?
All right. So for me, when I was a kid, really, I've always had interest in civics. In Kenya, it was part of the curriculum, and funnily enough, I always did good in that, and that went into a bit of interest in history. Well, too much interest in history, and especially in my high school days, I never got below a 90%. I was that kind of a student. It was just all over my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so going to campus, I had an interest with law, but I looked at the curriculum and I was like, this is not for me. There's a way in which I don't know, but for me, it looked like something that destroys your freedom of thinking. Yeah,
A system
it puts
of
you in
injustice.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
You become a reflector of men's thoughts rather than an originator of thoughts. So I've just had it with me, and I've always been curious about what's going on with the country, and also the lessons we get from history, honestly, because I think, what's that guy's name? I can't even remember. But this famous writer or presenter or something who said history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So
I don't remember
yeah,
who that is, but that rings a bell. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So last year's finance bill is when I really started making noise. Not even this year's, but last year's finance bill is when I was making noise. Then I realized I was alone in my circle. So I guess maybe we'll talk about that later.
Nice, yeah. It's very frustrating to be awakened, as you refer to that, and be alone. Like, you turn around and you're asking yourself, are you crazy? And the thing is, you're asking yourself that because of the confusion. You're looking and you're seeing things are not right, but what you're hearing people say is not matching what you're seeing. And therefore you start like questioning yourself, your sanity, because at that point you're alone. So I'm glad that you've encountered others who are thinking like you. I'm glad that we've all encountered each other, because at one point we had those moments of, am I the one who's crazy? But now I know everyone else is crazy and we are the ones who are sane. So let's talk about neocolonialism and Kenya's current struggles. Yeah. How has neocolonialism evolved in Kenya since independence, and in what way does it continue to influence the political economic landscape? And by the way, before either one of you, and any one of you can start, I guess we can start with John. We can alternate, right? John can go, and then next time NothingKE can start. But for example, as I was reading, I was talking to you all about the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it was in that book that I realized neocolonialism is not actually, because for the longest time, when I say neocolonialism, I just see the African leaders, right? But that's not where it starts. The root of neocolonialism is the United States, literally. Not even the UK, not France, not Germany, the United States. So the CIA, the NSA, the undercover efforts of the United States is the root of neocolonialism. They intentionally create the leaders we have in Africa, in South America, and therefore neocolonialism. So, John, go ahead and talk about it.
It's interesting you've premised it that, because I don't know if you realize, towards especially the end of the Second World War, there was this change of baton, if you may, between the 19th century hegemony of Britain to now the American century, as they call it, Pax Americana, right? So America emerges out as this superpower and now the hegemon for the world. Of course, with a bit of noise from Russia, but when you look at all the metrics, they were ahead, and they forced the British and everybody else. They put them in a place where it's economically unsustainable to have an empire, and the reason is they want to tap and control those markets. So if you may remember, the British Empire had the preferential trade agreement between herself and the colonies, but they were forced to break that down as a point of paying back their war reparations. So, and this is around the time when we are having the independence movements in Africa, mostly 50s and 60s. And so this change of guard happens, and the interesting bit is that the colonial governments in Kenya, wherever they had colonialism in Africa, they had a specific model of governance. And so that model of governance really worked for, of course, the tiny elite, the Mzungu, the white man who was around, of course, representing the big white man back at home. But with this new change of guard, you see, America apparently stands for democracy, for republicanism. Maybe you can talk about the difference between the two, and so-called, this the rule of the people, we the people, as it says in the Constitution. And so you have all these American-style governments coming up, but the honest truth is that it was an extension of the American empire, because the people, the white minority ruling class, was simply replaced by blacks who did the same job, but this time on behalf of another master, the United States. So maybe that's as far as I can go for now.
That's a great, yeah, and we'll come back to you, because now once you leave there, we need to understand what happens from then, right, to where we are now. Go ahead, NothingKE.
I like the introduction John has made. I told you earlier he's very well-read and done a good job on.
I said you can never have too much interest in history. Never.
I know.
Never. Yeah.
No, for me, I don't go that far back. But as I continue to ask this question of inequality, I understood that, we had the same mental capacity as other people. And I went through that moment. I can think, how comes other people are not saying this, yet they're leaders? And we had that conversation. And I remember my dad saying, do not worry, fools grow old. And at the time, I was very tiny. I was very shocked. It disturbed me. I wondered, is this man okay? And the kind of person I am, you have to give me evidence for me to understand what you're trying to communicate. So I ask a lot of questions. And the kind of people I embrace are people who challenge me. So we had that time when we thought the West is actually the savior. Then I ask myself, these people have been in Africa for such a long time. How comes there's no change? And I started telling myself, if individuals can make change in communities, then these people are robbers. And so I took keen interest. And at the time when I was thinking, the country has to change and the government of the day was not responding, I actually wrote to embassy. And I think I became a person of interest in some way. And that's when I realized they're not here to help us. They're here for themselves. So I started looking up. I came across John Parkin's story, and that broke my heart so hard. And then that was around COVID time, and we were grounded. So I started looking into what we need to do, how change can happen. Then I started understanding how the West, I went through the wars before now coming to John Parkins. And the weapons of mass destruction were never found. So I asked myself, what was the interest? I realized it was resources. And as soon as the penny dropped, and I started thinking about the resources in Kenya, And I got into a rabbit hole where I came across a ledger on their website about the resources that are exported from Africa.
Mhm.
At that point, I understood why we have horrible leaders. I started looking into the history of different African leaders and what they did for their country. Then I saw a pattern of a lot of assassination. And I wondered,
Yeah.
how comes there's always a dark story about presidents dying in state houses in Africa? And then the ones we lost were the change makers.
Mhm.
Now I came across John Perkins. And when I watched that documentary, The Four Horsemen, it broke my heart that from that day to date, I've never watched mainstream media because I now know it's propaganda. And I knew that there is need for Africans to talk to each other. There's need for change. And when you talk to a lot of people, some people were interested in the topic, others thought the change will never come.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, it looks like the change is here and it's inevitable. So
Yeah.
I looked into how comes there's no stability in Southern Sudan. I started looking at the corridors they use, and I realized one of their weapon is African leaders. Because you can't tell me someone can run a campaign, end up in office, and you cannot implement change. I looked at the basic needs, the things we were taught that can open up a market, like electricity, water, road network, markets. And I realized nobody was paying attention to that. Instead, they were using them as bait during campaigns.
Yeah.
So at some point, I thought of running for office. Then I went to look into the channels of politics, and I realized that is not for me. But I continue having the conversation. So the kind of person I am, I come across quite boring for someone who wants to talk about different things. Because for me, they change, and to see change in Africa is where my head is locked.
Mhm.
I understood that the America is just used to act as a big brother. I will help you with this, but they're out for their interest. It led me on a path to do international relations, and I decided to do background on it, and I realized this is not for me again. I felt like I was ahead of what they were going to teach me, and I did not want to be caged by what I'm taught. I needed to find information for myself. That's when now I saw a pattern of why Africa is caged. And when there was that clip during, was it 21, where they say that if they are not able to plunder African resources, the quality of life in the East and West will fall.
Yes.
And so we continue the conversation, and now we can freely, more people are joining in and agreeing that the West is out to benefit from Africa and to destroy Africa.
Yeah.
That is why we don't have stable governance. And when there's governance, like I followed Julius Malema's story and why he did not make it to office, not because he can't. They actually interfere with
Mhm.
elections in Africa. So you always find there's this promising candidates, but then because they're pulling string behind, you end up with the wrong person in power. And that's
Yeah.
why I don't want them to get involved in any other election monitoring, because now we know what they do.
Mhm.
And like, for example, the case for Senegal, when they realized these guys were asking questions, they put them in jail and released them a week to election. And woe unto them, they actually won. So yeah, Africa is the future. We need the West to stop interfering with the affairs of Africa. They need to leave us alone to determine the future. We do not need their support. We have resources. I've looked into Gaddafi
Mhm.
and how they use your own to turn your own against you, because they are not perfect people. And but when you look at how much he was able to achieve for Libya, if that man was given a chance to be the African president and unite Africa, Africa would be different,
Mhm.
because we have the manpower, we have the human capital, we have the resources and the know-how. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I am so glad you mentioned that. And by the way, you mentioned there's a proverb I came across yesterday: where there is no enemy within, as you say that, when there is no enemy within, the enemies outside cannot hurt you, right? So it is the enemy within who has always given the enemy without access and the power. Without the enemies within our community, the West would have no power over us. So again, John Perkins will be joining us on our collaboration sessions with Imagine Al-Keblan in a few weeks. So we are asking you all to join us. Those of you who have questions and want to ask them directly to him, join us. And yes, his books, which I have put in the chat, I recommend it for any African who wants to understand what is actually happening. Any African who wants to actually learn the truth. So let's talk about Magufuli. The first time I encountered NothingKE, she was talking about Magufuli, and I just sat and I was quiet and I just listened. It was not so nice to hear you just break it down. So we'll start with you. Tell your story of encountering Magufuli and that speech that you talk about that you encountered of his. And if you have actually have the source where we can get the speech, just let me know. I'll Google it and I'll put it in the chat for our audience.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I remember that's how we crossed paths. No, as I was looking into African leaders, I got interested in Magufuli. I actually traveled to Tanzania when he took over power, because what they were doing, they were highly demonizing the man. And I kept telling myself, it is not possible that this man is such a monster. I needed to learn the story for myself as opposed to what people were saying. Of course, being on the ground, I saw a bit of change, but it was not enough for me to learn. So I started digging up his story, and I came across an interview where the late Magufuli, and may his soul rest in peace, but they kill one and 1,000 more, 1 million more of us emerge, so they will never kill Africa. So Magufuli explained that he actually worked in Kenya some times ago, and he had the same question as I had. And the time came, he got an opportunity to serve in government, and he did, but he did not share his dream for the country. He served as a faithful servant, and eventually he became president because he was able to deliver. And he said, when I became president, I was not actually a bad person, but these people will push your button, and I knew I was in to fight for Tanzania. So the first thing he did was to close the debt book, and they were not happy. And that's why they kept demonizing him. He did not take external loan. Then he explained what the West did. First, they started by selling Africans as slaves. A time came, they realized that is not tenable. They stopped slave trade and went into colonization. Then people started fighting for their land. When they realized, again, this is not going to last much longer, they gave them a fake freedom, but colonized them through the Constitution. And then they made people believe that this sacred Constitution need to be protected because therein lies your rights. And that's why for the longest, a lot of people only understood the Constitution in terms of human rights, where they pump a lot of money. So you do not want it to be altered. And you, because you're thinking, oh, I'm an activist, I'm fighting for human rights. You plug in your energy, not knowing that you're actually being used to fight your own, and even they do not understand the definition of human rights. So he talked to the human rights group and said, look here, we need to build Tanzania. And he said, this is how. So he went for the Constitution to change. He said that in any country, the government has the most money, but the Constitution says the government cannot do business with itself. And he's changed the clause to allow government to do, the Constitution to allow the government to do business with itself. And immediately, the people who are in for resources started pumping money in human rights group. And they were saying, oh, wachimba migodi wataondoka, meaning the companies that mine resources will leave. And he said, let them leave. And he went ahead full throttle and changed. Then he said, They will no longer take loans abroad because those loans are inflated. We never get to know what is the cost of excavating a mine.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, no, you cannot tell a private company how to run. Magufuli said, Tanzania is not a private company. We have our sovereignty. We determine the rule of the game. We have been in the jungle long enough.
Mm-hmm.
Then he kept pushing. He said, and 50% of the board of the mining company will have to be Tanzanians.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, they actually stopped excavation. They said, it's not possible to do business with you guys. They said, it's okay, you can leave. He told them they can leave. Then they came back. China boarded, and then they came back to negotiate. And that was agreed. Because Magufuli was saying, you can't tell me. They show you a small rock at an auction in Hong Kong or in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of money they're selling that rock for is not what they paid the government. So he said, this had to stop.
Yeah.
And he said he would never rest. He was also always looking at how to protect and develop Tanzania. He said he was able to raise a lot of money from that. He would know what is the cost of excavating a mine, and they were looking into doing that. Then he said, I'm going to make sure that electricity is as cheap as it is abroad. I've been to Germany, and everywhere you go, you find hot water. But even the residents don't know where the hot water comes from. But because energy is cheap, they're able to provide hot water for the community, and they're able to power their industry. So he said, I'll make electricity cheap. And he decided to build the Julius Nyerere hydro dam. And again, they started telling him, oh, you want to destroy nature. When he identified the site, he said, you want to destroy nature, you can't do this. They paid human rights. He told them, now I'm going to deal with you. He said, at that point, I became the thug to deal with this madness. I said, I kicked them out in a neighboring country called Kenya. Because I'm not going to be gagged. They're not going to stop me from doing what I need to do. I'm the president. I make the decision, not who pays the piper. They're not going to pick the tune. This is a sovereign country. And he was saying, when we went to clear to start building the dam, he said, we found airstrip. And as a president who gets intelligence daily, I didn't know these airstrips actually existed. He said, so they were robbing us and exporting the resources without our awareness. So he went ahead, he built a Julius Nyerere. He said, we are no longer exporting unprocessed resources because we have to build a country. And he gained the citizen support, because in some video he'd be on the road and telling people, you're seeing it's like a footpath. And he's telling them, can you believe we're going to put 4 lanes on this road? And including his ministers could not see the vision. People were so blinded by the poverty and underdevelopment they had experienced for many years, they couldn't see it. Then, as soon as they realized Magufuli was going to be a change maker, they started buying people in his government. And he said, I used to have such private meetings, but information would leak. And he said, I couldn't understand where the information was leaking from. He said, the first thing I told them, I know you guys, when you sleep with white women, you think you're men enough. I said, those are not, they're not women. They are women for hire to collect intelligence. They said, the minute you fall asleep, they tap your phone and you're speaking directly with me. And of course, people decide what to do with their private life. And I think a bit of that, there are a few people he mentioned that were doing it, and he dropped them from his cabinet. Then he bans, if you serve under him, you cannot go to international hotels. He said, those are not hotels. Those are intelligence gathering centers. So he said, no government meeting in international hotels. And no, if you're going to serve under me, not dating white women. Because then he said information was still leaking because people were getting bored. Oh, he said the white women are paid $6,000 per day. So they hung around you think you hit on her, but the whole time she just found a way to be around your spaces because you're being tracked for them to get your intelligence. So he said he started tapping their calls. And he said, one by one, I figured who the moles were. I knew how much money had been paid. I knew this money was coming through civil society. And he said, I knew I was at war because the enemy within is more dangerous than the enemy without, because these are people he had he would eat with. And then if you've been to Tanzania, the locals are very good at collecting intelligence. A family friend was telling us someone walked into her house, like they come to your house uninvited, and noticed books in her house. And later that afternoon, she was picked by the police for them to establish whether she was legally in school. And so it was easy for Magufuli to get intelligence from the citizens. The fact that he had that on his side, though there were so many people who were being poisoned. There's a guy, he even said it. He said he's even lucky he didn't die. And he's back in Tanzania. Tundu Lissu was being used by the West. Looking him up, he was being used by the West to destabilize Magufuli. Magufuli said, you either work with me or you get out. And because they were pumping a lot of money on him, he felt he could upend his rule, but it was not possible. I said the one time we almost got him, but he survived in Nairobi hospital. Jeez. And after that, he had to flee the country. So Magufuli said he kept pushing, he never went. He said this thing of summoning Western leaders, African leaders to the West so that you go lecture them like children. He said, I will not do it. He never embraced an extravagant lifestyle. He was out to build Tanzania, and his footprints are on the ground. What he did is visible. The only place he visited was in South Africa and Rwanda because he was trying to engage them to actually break free from the Western influence. Then COVID came. When COVID came, Magufuli said, when they start sending you diseases, they start scaring you about diseases, don't look at the disease, look at what they're not telling you. He said the economy is in jeopardy. And they're looking for how to get into your countries, how to slow down the economies around the world so that we cannot say, it is specifically the economy that is not working. So he said, Tanzanians, go to work, live your life, do you. But a few people were getting paid to fake data. Magufuli tested a pineapple, a mango, and a goat. Remember, John? He said all those samples came out positive. Right now, Pfizer president, yes. So he said this is nonsense, and he blocked them. But the Pfizer president and the person who created the PCR test, he said it was not the right tool to test COVID, and that's why people are getting false positive. So he said they will not do tests in Tanzania, and there's going to be no vaccine. And I remember watching on CNN, Bill Gates, and this one he cannot get off because we can pull the clip. Bill Gates saying, we can't get data out of Tanzania. He said, can someone handle him?
Oh my God.
On CNN, because by this time I was already on the rabbit hole finding out what kills African president. That scared me. And I started now asking why Bill Gates is a consultant on a global pandemic with no background in medicine. I started holding them to account why they were removing the process of building a vaccine, and asked them, when you're doing a vaccine, you first have to identify the what caused the virus, the origin of the virus. I said the interest right now should be getting into China, and I started looking for scientists who are following up on the same. And eventually, the group broke into two: those who said I'll stand with the truth, and those who said if I walk away, I will never get funding for my research. And so many things. But the whole time I'm following up the cases in Tanzania. And he went on to do a lot. When he was fighting this war against minerals, he got a leakage that they are trying to sneak out. He said they sneak out your resources as soil to go and process it in their country. He got a leak from someone at the port, and he went to the port, and that's the first time they were very close to assassinate him. If you remember, even when he was campaigning, even if it is an artist like Zuchu around him, there would be these men around him. But they found out that he had a heart pace, and they actually tried to stop it with a magnet, and that's the first time Magufuli collapsed. And then the results are out saying that Magufuli was killed with polonium poisoning. But I've read a different report that says that there was uranium in his blood, and I don't know how that got there. Why I stand with the outcome that they actually killed the man. Tindu, when Magufuli was at Nairobi Hospital, I was in the same wing, but I was too ill. I didn't know that he had been there, but I got better and I left. And I knew the nurses who were in that wing. The lie that Magufuli died of COVID was manufactured by the West because they wanted to show people, oh, you know, this guy actually resisted a vaccine and he died of the disease. That's not true. By this time, I've heard from Magufuli's interview that Tindelisu is a puppet of the West, and Tindelisu was giving per minute updates of what was happening to Magufuli, even when he died. Tindu was it Netherlands? I forgot. He was giving information on per minute basis. This was not a leader. This was not he was not in government. How did he know what was happening to Magufuli? Because there were other people involved. Because the government of Kenya surrounded Nairobi Hospital. They actually admitted Raila Odinga so that it looks like it's because of him that they have raked up security in Nairobi Hospital, yet they were trying to protect Magufuli. So he needs to defend himself and tell us how is it that he had a per minute update of what was happening to Magufuli. So Magufuli taught us it is possible to free Africa. It is possible to develop without taking loans from the West. It is possible to get African leaders, but to develop a country, you have to be willing to put your lives on the line to defend that African leader from the interference of the West, because they'll stop at nothing. They'll come with propaganda. They will use. There's no president from my research who's very popular when they're in office, because there are always other people who maybe are paid, or there are other areas of interest that are not aligning. So even if we get a new president in future, for a country to develop, the whole nation has to be willing to be the military around that president. And that is why we should never allow military bases in Africa, because those bases are the ones used to get into those state lodges, to look for people who can be bought, to sneak out resources out of the continent, because these are people who are skilled. And as I learned, allow me to give an example of Niger and Burkina Faso. In Niger, when they took power and they said, we don't want American base in Niger, they said, oh no, we will come for negotiation. And indeed, they got there for negotiation. When they got there, the president asked for the list of the people who were coming for negotiation. When the lists landed on his desk, he said, this is not a negotiating team. This is military takeover. He gave them 48 hours to leave the country because majority of the people who were on the list were actually military men in active duty and high ranking. And after that, he called for a public meeting where, you know, sometimes when you want to pass a message, you have to use the citizen, where religious leaders said they want the last boat of American soldiers out of Niger. They said, oh, you know, you guys are going to get attacked. He said, we know militias are paid. We've been in the military. They said, it's okay, we will handle that. But he said, there's no benefit to have this basis. After all, it even says, if we are attacked, you cannot come for a rescue. So he said, you need to leave. And they tried to negotiate. They tried those insurgency attack. It didn't work. And they had to leave. Burkina Faso, the same thing. We are now on the 16th attempted attack on Ibrahim Traore. And Ibrahim Traore again was told, you know, you will have a lot of attacks from within. Traore called for a public meeting. He told the citizen, you know, the people who are used are not outsider. It's your brothers and sisters. He said, I need every family member to account for their own. If you do not account for your own, where we find them, we will kill them. People went back home and those attacks stopped. And I learned. Thank you.
I'm glad you expanded that conversation on Magufuli to even go to other activists, because the next question, once Seremani submits about Magufuli, is going to be the challenges activists face currently. But Seremani, yes, let's hear your thoughts about Magufuli.
Yeah, Magufuli is an interesting case because it's a modern example of a Patrice Lumumba or a Sankara showing up unexpectedly, and I think maybe where I can start with is understanding that the change, these leaders, let me say, these leaders who come to the fore and then they see all that has been happening and they desire to do some change for the good of the people. I think often always, as Nothing said, that the enemy is within, yeah? We live in an age, it's the final stage in terms of how human beings think about government. In my own personal studies, I've come to understand, or rather I've come to call it the intelligence security state. So we may not have the weapons or the industrial capabilities right now to actually go into a hot war with the West. But where we can fight and win is on the intelligence sector in terms of keeping ourselves safe. I like Tanzania because they have a system where any strange thing happening in your area and you report it to the police, and of course the police, they have a resident intelligence officer there who will be able to pass the information up. So of course, in a way, it can be bad as well. Yeah, especially if you're trying to keep the government accountable on something. But with regard to being safe from strange activities, there is a system, and yet still they killed him. You know, that's the weird thing. So we hear all these funny stories about, oh, Kenya NIS is the best in sub-Saharan Africa, and you're like, are you sure? So I think what Africans have to now start thinking about is how to beef up that because that's the first line of defense. If you have a president like Magufuli, who has realized what the West is doing and is out to make changes, he has to have someone in intelligence who thoroughly knows what they're doing. I think the first Black African who became intelligence chief, spy chief in Kenya, James Kanyotu. And guess what? He was 28 years old when he became spy chief. This is after independence. But he was very, very thorough, except, with moving with the times, the Kenyatta government, of course, was in bed with the West. But with regard to his work, I believe someone with that mindset, someone with that work ethic, under a Magufuli, certainly I don't think they would have reached him. So my two pieces is simply, I'm looking at that case and I'm wondering what can we learn, because many more will come, but they don't all have to die. We as Africans, we have to rethink how we can, because the military, I mean, it's there for a hot war, but with regard to people, agents, and people being paid to assassinate, to pass information and stuff like that, honestly, that's a front that we can win. And we need to study how to do it. Yeah.
So I have said this before, we have to change our tactics as far as dealing with the enemy within. And that is a conversation that can be had elsewhere. But you mentioned Kanyotu, and I was actually looking up to see, because this is the first time I'm hearing of him. Again, we are all learning, right? Whether he was a part of the Mau Mau, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, because I know the Kenya Land and Freedom Army had a strong intelligence unit. So I wanted to see whether he was a part of them. But unfortunately, as both you and NothingKE and myself, as we all know, the Kenyan government that came, which is a great segue to our next question, that came into being after the so-called independence was not really a Kenyan government. So yes, you say that you are passionate and an expert on constitutionalism, right? Well, how does constitutionalism fit into the broader struggle for African liberation, and how can it be used as a tool to protect African sovereignty from external manipulation? So we know the original constitution upon independence was not a Kenyan constitution. It was a British Kenyan constitution. We know the last constitution was not a Kenyan constitution. The most recent one that we claim, oh, finally we have a constitution that is ours, was not a Kenyan constitution. You have heard, for those of you who've heard Ekuro Aukot speak on this, on Kumbukeni, he said when they had a section of the constitution, the one that talks about the land, and the Brits called them and they were like, you need to change the wording on this part of the constitution, because it basically was saying that Kenya can get land back, and the Brits were not happy about that. So we have never had, especially in Kenya, I don't think anywhere in Africa, any purely African constitution. It has always been interfered with by the Nkrumah talks about it in The Struggle Continues. As they were trying to get independence, the Brits were there saying, you have to have this way, you have to have this way, or we will not give you independence. And Nkrumah mentioned that they had to give in order to get them out, but they knew they would change it once they went out. So please talk about it. We'll start with you, John Seremani, the Constitution. And I don't know if you even remember the question. Should I repeat the question again?
No, I think I'm good.
Good, great, thank you.
If I go off, you can let me know.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, concerning the place of the constitution in the struggle and the independence constitution, like you said, it was a British Kenyan constitution, and the Kenyan part is the Kenyan elites, the home guards who came into power. I think if it was the Mau Mau who are forming government, the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, then we could have said it's a Kenyan constitution. But unfortunately, it turns out that these were deals that were struck in the boardroom somewhere, both in London and in Kenya. And the land situation actually is very, very, as you know, it's been a problem ever since. South Africa is going through a similar situation with regard to land. Most of the land is white-owned. Things like that are happening. You may not like what Mugabe did in Zimbabwe, but it's a similar problem. You know, here in Kenya as well, you have a lot of land, so-called conservancies, you know, and white people who some of them don't even know they own it. So back to the constitution. In technical terms, it was a good system, I would say, largely because of the influence of Jaramogi, the parliamentary system that we initially had, because remember, we didn't have a president, we had a prime minister. It wasn't a presidential system, it wasn't an imperial presidency, but the greed of many people united to slowly form it. I think the initial constitution was a first step in a long journey, but we were diverted away from that journey. We ended up wasting 40 to 60 years, I think 40 to 50 years of our independence years in fighting to get back to that journey. Remember, Kenyatta, even as he's dying, there's so much power concentrated with the president. His people would just show up anywhere and decide to take people's lands, and nothing would happen. There was no rule of law. There was no systems. Well, a few of systems were working, but when it comes to, systems work if they work, if, let's say, if the wealthy and powerful are also under the law, but the wealthy and powerful are not under the law. So the initial constitution was imperfect, it was inadequate, it was a first step, but we lost way because of the greed of people who are after the idea of bringing power towards themselves, collecting power. Moi comes in, he makes it even worse. Now it's his time to eat, him and his people, and that goes on for 24 years. And then there's a clamoring for a new constitution. My thinking is this, that a constitution is an aspiration to begin with. The people may not necessarily have the capacity to live everything in the constitution or to embody every principle there, but it's a good thing. It's a good idea. It's not necessarily a Western idea, but it's a way in which the people can, because the constitution is there to govern the government on behalf of the people. So especially with this new constitution, when you read Article 1, 1 and 2 as well, the phrase 1 and 2, you realize that the only subject is the government. There's no other subject in Kenya. And the ruler, the sovereign, is the people. So it's a good place to begin with in shaping the character and thoughts of the people, that you get to choose. If Kenyans want a communist system, they should be able to get it. If Kenyans want anything, whatever they want, they should be able to get it, and no one should stand in their way. But I think, as I try to learn, law, or rather, technically the constitution, but law in general, in Africa, in Kenya, has now been turned, it has been used to penalize people who question the status quo. And remember, the status quo are these merchants of, or rather, how can I put them? I don't abuse people. Well, let me say they are minions of the West. I think it's a polite way. Yeah, people like William Ruto, someone who's portraying himself as a Pan-Africanist. I will never go to. We should not go to Rome. We should not go to a Western country to borrow funds. And the next week, he's right there with everybody else, So I think
so funny. It's so funny you say that, because every Sunday he's there talking about how he's in the church. If nothing else, Ruto should expose the falseness of the church. But go ahead.
Exactly. And by the way, we have a lot to say about that, Nothing and I, about the church. But you see, it's a perversion of law, because law is supposed to protect, especially the least, the poor, the vulnerable. Law is there to protect, but the object of law has been turned, and it's now punishing the poor and protecting the crime that it's supposed to punish, right? And many African constitutions are like that. Let's go to Congo Brazzaville. Let's go to Gabon. I don't know how old that guy is. Let's go to Cameroon. Who was that who was coming back from China but didn't make it back? Was it Gabon? It doesn't make sense, Anyway, let me hear what you guys have to say.
Is it recent or back in the day, who was coming from China and didn't make it?
I think it was last week. Must have been the president. It seems like he's sick, and people are like shivering and saying, "Oh, what's going to happen?" Because he's been there for so long. They don't know now how to move ahead. He is the constitution, basically,
Wow.
But of course, he's a puppet of the West. So.
Yeah. NothingKE. Constitution.
I think you asked the wrong person. I think it's not our constitution still. Initially it was British, now it's British American, because even the structure that we took up are very similar to America. And we necessarily didn't have to go in that direction. The fact that the Constitution does not entirely protect the citizen, I don't think it's a valid constitution, especially with the rampant repeat behavior to disobey the law. And this happens with the support of the West. We have seen very punitive bills being introduced, yet the Constitution gives citizens a right to protect their indigenous seeds. So if the Constitution is sovereign, why are they subjugating its instruction and introducing a punitive bill that we need to be licensed to actually grow our food? In the West, organic food is very expensive. That tells you that is where the value is. So why do they need, when it comes to Africa, the origin of the food we grow and the animal we keep come from Stone Age. Man was a hunter and a gatherer. So if it's a habit that we picked, maybe even far from creation, all the way back to creation, why do they need to control that? So they use the Constitution, they cherry pick on where to use the Constitution. Again, back to human rights. But other areas, the Constitution should be our shield and our hallmark of sovereignty. It is being perforated to fit the West. Because because we know those are not local bills, before introducing a livestock bill, because how they started with this issue of livestock, they said, oh, there's this methane gas that affects the atmosphere. Before that, they were telling us you should not eat beef because of the cholesterol. And I asked people, do animals grow fat from eating beef or from eating grass? I mean, we fatten animals with plants. So if you track it, you will see they've been trying to find a way into our way of life by trying to abuse the Constitution. And that is why we have to raise our voices to defend the farmer, because anything touching the land, it tells you that the interest to bring in neocolonization, hiding in plain sight, is finally here. But I'm very confident that it will not take effect. The Constitution protected even the leasehold land. People were not paying rates, but they want to introduce that. And in the event that you're not able to pay, then they take back your land. So there's so much in this Constitution that we need to redefine. We need to write it the Kenyan way. We need to let them know that the sovereignty of our nation should protect the land that we sit on. It is time for us to tell them, based on this Constitution, we need them to live. You know, for the longest, they demonized Mugabe, and even Africans looked down upon him. But now that we are grown, we understand and found ourselves in the current mess, we understand that Mugabe had such a focus and knew what he needed to do. We are seeing what they're trying to do in South Africa. So what Africa has, that it's its greatest resources, is the youth population. And that's why they're saying, oh, if we don't face a pandemic, we're going into another war. But I think Africans have had enough. The young generation are speaking up, speaking truth to power, and they're willing to fight for the land. Now, Constitution, we need, as a matter of urgency, to start. We don't have to wait until a time where we say, can we review it? People in their own area of expertise or passion should decide, we will protect the land. These people have to get out. There is nowhere in America or in UK or in China that African countries own that huge chunks of land. So for them to understand that we actually understand the sovereignty of our country is being tampered with, and this is a reason any country would go to war for, they need to accept, respect, sovereignty of nations and vacate the land. 2, they should never dictate for Africa on what to do with their lives. Okay? The food we grow is our biggest shield because it gives us immunity. They were expecting we will fall like flies. Again, Bill Gates and his wife said on national media, CNN, that if it hits Kibera, they will fall like flies because there's nowhere to quarantine. Now we have so much land that we can use for good. And for that to happen, we have to start rewriting a new constitution without fear and without external interference that says Kenya belongs to Kenyans, Africa belongs to Africans. And we need, African countries needs to be their brother's keeper, take care of your country, and then we look at how we can unite. I remember when they were bringing in the AU seat for Raila, and I digress and allow me for a minute. This lady said, was it a British ambassador to Kenya? She said, oh, you should we support him so that you guys can have an African Union that looks like European Union. And immediately I typed, we do not want to replicate anything. I think John saw it. We do not want to replicate anything from the West. We want to write our history. And one way of rewriting our history is first defend what we already have. The land is ours. Whether they said they did not vacate, they vacated it. We don't want them on our land. We don't want British and American military on our land. And that is something we should enact in a constitution. We do not want to be part of, our constitution does not allow us to be a new NATO member because it simply says that we become an American colony. We do not want to be part of that. Immediately they talked about going to Haiti. I looked into what are the resources in Haiti, and immediately I knew why Haiti cannot be allowed to be free. So back to constitution, we need to study it and pluck out pages that do not favor us without remorse. We don't have to have a very big book, and it has to be taught. No other generation should rise up to defend what was God given. Okay, so we should rewrite it, and anyone who gets a chance, whatever you think are areas we should protect, write it, and eventually we bring it together, argue, to agree to disagree, what we need to take out and what we need to protect. Because currently, I think it heavily, like Magufuli said, heavily protects the West. Allow me to digress again. When there was this war about the dam in Addis, they were telling them, you went into a pact in 1905 that you will not tamper with the Nile water. And they were trying to turn Egypt and Sudan against Ethiopia. And I was an activist on Twitter on that war. And the Prime Minister, I was very disappointed to see him with Bill Gates the other day. The Prime Minister said, no, we will not allow, we will build. These are resources within our land. So we will build. We are not going to Egypt to stop the water. We're not going to Sudan, but we are building a hydro dam to make electricity cheaper so that we can build industry. And by sheer luck, by God's grace, when the dam was completed, the place flooded. So they started poking holes at them and saying, why don't you call Egypt and Sudan to come for water? Because this water is a bit too much for us to handle. And they are able to produce the electricity. At the time, they created a crisis that they needed to bring in food. I want to discuss the enemy within and the constitution. They said there was an area in Ethiopia where people were dying of hunger. And such areas, even in Kenya and other African countries, exist. And again, bad governance leaders there. And they said they want to, UN needs to donate food. And he said, no, borders closed, you're not bringing anything. Because these are people who have studied the West. and they know how they operate. And eventually, after a lot of pressure, there's a lady in the US from Ethiopia was there. That lady activated that issue to the very end. So they said, eventually said, fine, we will receive the food. Then he positioned military men and civilian to be the recipient of this food donation. And after they offloaded the donation, now the other armed and dressed military guys surrounded the food and they started tearing the bag. Do you know there were guns in the donation? So if it's maize, there's cereals and there are guns inside. And he said, this is the donation you want to put. So Africans should understand the sovereignty of their constitution does not exactly protect them. On the constitution, there's something about refugees that was signed when they were exiting from Afghanistan. We saw a huge number of people being brought into the nation in buses, and Kenyans were like, "Oh, there's people who are here," and immediately they were surrounded. I remember Matiang'i was interior minister. Then in less than 24 hours, they had backed down. They said, "Oh, these guys were bringing out." These guys were bringing out the clause that we say we signed to support refugees. But now I looked at other places in Africa where these people were taken, and South Africa was one. But South Africa had said no. They said the refugees we recognized are people who turn up at your border. They have no clothes, they have no transport, they have no passport. How is it that we have refugees arriving on a flight and being delivered in buses? They said no, we're not going to allow them in. Then they sent an American lawyer who said, "Oh, you signed the Refugee Act, so we're going to court." And he said, "It's okay, we'll go to court." And then they sent the notice to appear to court to very late and to a junior clerk. But they were saying by sheer luck, in fact, the minister said the God was on their side. Somebody was able to pick it and escalate it. And they appeared to the judge. And he asked the judge, who are these people who are being dropped into our country? Tomorrow, if we start experiencing insecurity, how will I explain to South Africa, how did I allow this to happen? They said, oh, you signed a Refugee Act. They said, no, it does not mean that you go to war. You went and destroyed Afghanistan for their resources, and then you promised the internal enemy that when things go south, you'll take them to your country. But instead, you're dumping them in Africa. But they were telling those guys, do not agree to be used, and then you're dumped in Africa. These guys promise you to take you to America. When they tell you that you're settling you here for a short period, it's a lie. Let them take you where they promise you to take you. And South Africa, there was a UN lawyer who came in, a lady, I'll share the links later, and they tried to defend, but the judge, in fact, that guy was explaining on South African broadcast, he said the judge knew something was off and extended hearing hours, and eventually that was not allowed. Constitution, we need to look into it. We need to cancel things that do not serve a nation and rewrite our constitution in terms of how we want people to respect us, how we want to protect the nation, resources, natural resources, the people of the republic, how the security forces should defend external interference, but not the enemy coming to lie low as a training base because they are collaborating with the military. Kenya has not been to war. We don't need external military on our soil. Again, when we started, I think John and I have been to a few spaces, and I said, I don't think we should allow American military into Kenya. And then the British general came and he had a session with a Kenyan general, and he said, oh, we have collaborated and protected you against terror attacks. And I told Kenyans, be ready for a terror attack. The other day, American Embassy said that, you know, they gave a warning that we are likely to face that. And John Perkins explained how they destroy a nation. So now that the citizens of our country are rising against them, they are looking for ways and means to distract our mind. And that is why we need to continue calling out that. And we can work with the Constitution as it is, but there's urgency to modify it. Because like Magufuli explained, and I forgot to highlight that part, is that when they left, they knew where the resources were. He said he had been to Turkana, and Shell had a board that said Shell. They knew there was oil blocks there. And so they used the Constitution to chain Africa. And they're the beneficiary of those on the Constitution that they left. As I said, it was not drafted by Africans. And when you draft it, they highly fund it. So again, the enemy within still is used to offer the expertise that favor the West. But their time is out. If they are wise, they need to respect Africa and get out when they still can. If not, the Africans are ready to defend the nation. I land. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You know, John, you were mentioning if at independence it was the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, the KLFA, erroneously known as Mau Mau, who took over, then we truly would have had independence. And as you were talking, I quickly went off video to grab the book so that I can read a small part about it. This is an interview of one of the former warriors of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. He's asked, some of the freedom fighters like General Bamuingi decided to go back to the forest after Uhuru. Why was this? And he says, the fundamental reason is that they were not satisfied with the outcome of their long, painful struggle. They saw no differences between the colonial government and the Uhuru government. They were disgusted to discover that the traitors of the movement had been given big posts in the KANU government and large tracts of land. General Bamuingi's demands were that all the traitors should be arrested and charged for the atrocities they had committed against the people, and the Mau Mau army should be recognized as a national army. Our government was not ready to accept these demands. So anyone who thinks that Jomo Kenyatta's government was a government of freedom, please change that thought. It is a false thought. It was a government of accommodation. It was a government that was willing to go along to get along. This is from the Kenya's Freedom Struggle, the Dedan Kimathi Papers book, compiled by Maina wa Kenyati. You brought up the church. I wasn't even, when I originally put together my questions, I wasn't going to bring the church up, but I am going to bring the church because you brought it up. And especially because you said that you and NothingKE have a lot to say about it. And because it is truly a problem, a very, very big problem today. Because I remember when Ruto was running and I started hearing praises of him, first of all, here, like in the West. I'm located currently, unfortunately, in the criminal enterprise, the center of it all, the main driver of immorality, despite the fact that they want to go around talking about they're the moral ones, right? And there was praise of him. And I remember it was in the circles because I hung out with our brothers and sisters, descendants of enslaved Africans here within these borders, and I'm in their circles. And they were asking me, oh, so this Ruto guy, he sounds like a good guy. What do you think of him? And I was like, say what now? I was in high school when Ruto started getting indicted for crime. I know he's a criminal. What are you talking about? He sounds like a good guy. So I was telling them, Ruto is a criminal. Ruto has always been a criminal. If you look at a lot of the major cases against government officials, his name is there. I don't think there's one where you will look and his name is not there if you actually see the true records of what is going on. So we have had from independence, so-called independence, people who are willing to continue the colonizers, to stick up for the colonizers' interests. So we've never, ever been liberated. We've never known independence. But let's talk about the church. John Seremani and NothingKE. John, what is the church's role in subjugating our people and in keeping us unliberated? especially in Kenya today, especially when we talk about Ruto every Sunday, it is at some church talking about the Bible and nonsense. And his wife is leading the freedom. By the way, speaking of his wife, she with his permission, right? Because this is the nepotism that is going on, sent the Kenyan police who went to Haiti with a delegation of missionaries, church people, to go represent them. And they were in talks with the missionaries in Haiti, so as people to protect. So let's talk about the church's role, please. Go ahead.
Wow. Okay. Let me just start with the exact thing you finished on. I think it's a manifestation of a misguided understanding of how, when we say church, we maybe generalize as religion, how religion should interact with government. I think we all know, they came into power riding on the support of many church leaders. To be specific, many evangelical church leaders. And we know also there's a tie between Kenyan evangelicals and American evangelicals. And, there's a lot going on in between there, funding, etc. But I think Ruto is a manifestation of the oligarchic thuggery that has governed this country. He's like the perfection, he's he's the final thing that emerges from all this corruption from independence. Because he's very smart, I won't lie. He's also a very driven and dedicated person. However, he's misusing his gifts. And he has allowed his greed to go all the way. So part of something that the neo-colonizers, or rather the stooges or the minions of the West use, is religion. Now, or rather, they misuse religion. It could be Christianity. In other countries, it could be Islam. I remember when Nigeria was arranging their protests, there are many imams who came out, and they were trying to stop the young people. How do you stop young people from going to ask for accountability? How does that make sense, religiously speaking? And if anything, the violence is going to come from the state. So it did make sense. Similar things happened here in Kenya, where there are pastors and many religious people who came out to try and warn Gen Z, but we've never had them coming out to call out the government on wrong, even on the finance bill itself.
Exactly.
So the only person, me personally, it makes me mad, because the only religious leader who has the right to tell people, oh, don't go to the protest, or don't do this, or it's dangerous or something, is the person who has come out before to support good governance. To call out the government when it's doing immoral, wicked, and evil things like killing people, and burying them, or rather cremating them, as Miguna
Right.
had, reported. That's pure evil. So I think that the church has been used for a long time, or rather, the church has been misused by politicians to control the consciousness of men, to influence and control the consciousness of men, to also provide a platform where these politicians could access people, a large numbers of people, because remember, every weekend people gather in church for worship. Fridays, Muslims are there as well. I don't think the Muslims are more open to politicians talking as Christians are.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a it's now turning for many congregations. It's turning into as a tool for social control. But unfortunately, let me try and do two thoughts here. Number one is that there are ministers, religious ministers, that people who have stood out for truth. Let's be honest about that. Even back in the day, people like Bishop Muge, people like Father Kaiser, so many people. When the government was doing wrong, that's in Kenya, that is. I'm sure there are others around the continent. they stood up for what was right. They called it out, and many of them paid with their life. That one we cannot negate. However, many of the systems, many of the denominations, many of the church organizations, if they won't bend the knee in terms of giving politicians and the president a space to spew his lies, they will gladly accept his donations. I'm trying to put a finger, I don't know how my phone is. Yeah.
Okay.
and those donations, in quotes, are proceeds of corruption, and the church is used for money laundering.
It's laundering.
Exactly. So you see, there's this symbiotic relationship because, of course, the pastor wants to grow his church. He wants to build a magnificent church to attract people. So it's no longer the message that is attracting people. It's the beauty of the church. And at the same time, the politician wants, to clean his money, and also the political largesse that comes from donating to church. You see, I'm a Christian, and even in the last election, they demonized Raila Odinga, that he's a witch. He's an
atheist.
Yes, he doesn't believe in God, and people actually believe that, because of that. And this other one is a Christian. Well, the Christian is now killing so many people for asking for their rights, So I think in conclusion for me, and this is where Nothing and I, we simply decided to do something about it. I think, me personally, I believe if there's a problem, if you have a problem with something, you do something about it. And if you can't do something about it, sure, you can make noise, but especially you see how you can do something about it. We decided to more formally join the hashtag Occupy Churches movement, which had somehow died down, but it's coming back in steam. We are trying to see how we can keep the pulpit clean of politicians or politics, but at the same time, keep them accountable, honestly, because you cannot, think about this, Nduku, think about this. Someone presides over the killing of unarmed, protesters. But he doesn't apologize. When he shows up on TV, he's justifying the actions of those rogue policemen. And then finally, he shows up at your church to worship. Really? I mean, if Jesus took a cord and whipped people out of the temple, probably we should do the same. So anyway, let me land there and allow Nothing to say, please.
I am so glad you said that. Geez, Nothing, go ahead before I go on and ramble, please.
Yeah, John forgot to say that he's a committed Christian. I am too.
I'm so sorry for both of you, but that's okay. I'll keep reaching out to the ancestors.
No. We are standing up. When John started that Occupy Church space, we were asking questions. These people have taught very good sermons on how you should live your life, but they have not lived by it. When we went through struggles, they did not come out to tell the truth, speak truth to power. They never, they didn't commend or use their voices for good. They did not visit the sick. They did not bury people's children. They did not offer their resources where they were needed. They coiled back and they watched the news as, passive audience. Yet that was their moment to come out and preach the actual gospel.
Yes.
So there's a disconnect. There's a lot of atheism at the moment. There's the narrative we get in that space is we believe in God, but not religion. Christianity is receiving a good whooping. But when we started, the question was, is God in the movement? And we agreed and gave examples where we think God is in the movement. And I, from the onset, I told John, I feel like this is a spiritual battle. It's not physical. And the reason why I'm certain we'll have a victory over these issues is because it's a spiritual battle. And church was an altar that was used. But I want to believe what we call church is a decoy for something different, for different altars. And that's why what we expected to be done is not happening. And so, because like when I was asking all those questions, why this Africa? And I'd actually pray about them. Sorry. And I feel like God is breaking the altar that has been used as a platform called church. Because the revolution has stripped them naked. They can no longer hide in their cloak. They can no longer hide in their messaging. They can no longer. And what they forgot is that the young population is the majority. You know, I never understood why the West, some places that used to be a church, you go and it's a pub, it's an eatery. It makes sense. I didn't expect that even in Kenya, that day is here. Because what the messages they have preached, they have preyed on people who believed in God for so long, and finally who they truly are. The wolves can no longer hide. They've been hiding, you know, on a sacred, or what is supposed to be a sacred altar for so long. But finally, their fall is here. I don't think the church in Kenya will recover their reputation. I don't at all believe they will. They had an opportunity. They had their day with destiny. They picked government over the congregants. When we had people come on board and we asked, how come you're saying nothing on this matter? And they'd say, oh, you know, governance is put by God, and they would use the scripture. I said, don't cherry pick the word of God. Psalm 78:76 says that a leader should be above reproach and should be held accountable. And at that point, there was utter silence. So yeah, the church was used, but I'm at a point where I'm grateful that it happened, because imagine if you removed one bad thing, like we have to throw out what is not right for us in the Constitution. We have to throw out leadership that does not serve its citizen. Imagine if we did that and left the church that was a sellout.
I agree.
You get, we would, it's like we would end up with another problem manifesting itself differently, and would end up having to pick on scabs. So I personally feel it's a spiritual battle. Everything that is going wrong has to go wrong, so that when we rebuild the foundation, it is a stronger foundation, because whatever the church has done cannot be repeated. They have nowhere to hide, and they have young people speaking truth to them and saying, unacceptable, this is wrong. So I think a time is coming where we can no longer call them the church and add a new word on a dictionary where we define who these people are. Because if you ask me, I think these are cults packaged as church, because of how with a country where over 90% is actually Christian, and the behavior in the country does not reflect the actual word of God, a constitution that you cannot amend. I tend to feel like it had to happen the way it's happening. They had to throw us under the bus. They had to play by the cards they have played on, because these are things that we didn't know was a wrong altar, but now they can't hide. It's evidence that what we have called a church in Kenya, of course, not in its entirety. There's still a few people, good apples here and there, but then the majority, the way we are 80%, I want to say 80% of church is rogue. Because very small voices we are seeing coming forth. So yeah, when we started the conversation, there was a lot of woundedness, because we had expectation that the church, or the fear of God, in fact, we always say with John, the issue is there's no fear of God in Kenya. And if the church moral compass was compromised, we don't need them. We need, if we can have conversation on spaces, we can also have our fellowships on spaces, we don't need to be under someone who's going to abuse their authority. And because the church has abused its authority, I think they fit they're cut from the same fabric with government, where they fell for the seduction of, material things, and they
Capitalism.
forgot. Yeah, they forgot their core mandate. That said, I'm grateful that altar is broken. That
Yeah.
altar is broken. It
I'm
is
glad.
definitely a cult. It
Yeah.
is a cult. It's not a church.
I'm glad you mentioned the constitution that cannot be changed, because I was going to say the constitution that has been changed. The Bible was something else before King James decided to come and change it, right? You have a King James Bible, you have the slave Bible. So this book that we have been following has some questionable history in it. And I was going to say, actually, as you were talking about Kenyans abandoning the church, but Africans in general, instead, I am one for them abandoning the church. And instead of going to church, I said the other day to one of my family members, what I do is actually more in service of God. When you think about God and humanity and how we are supposed to live with each other, what we do in our activism is more in service of that, right? Service of humanity, of life, of upholding life, than what the people who go to church every Sunday is in. Especially in Kenya, it's become such a it's almost like a prostitution. I'm calling it that to make a point. A prostitution venue. It is the place where capitalists go to cleanse their spirits of the evil of the week, so that they can feel so they do crime from Monday to Saturday, and then on Sunday they go to church and they can feel like, oh, I am a good person, and then they go back to crime from Monday to Saturday, and then on Sunday they go to church and I am a good person. And as long as they have that pretense, they can never confront the true role that they have in society of abusing society, right? When I see people like, oh my God, what's her name? What's her name? This famous Kenyan woman who married this man, and all she does is literally sell her body. And she's in church on Sunday singing, and they're all praising God and Jesus, but she can be immoral from Monday to Saturday. Yeah, you start questioning what are we doing, right? When talking about Ruto, when you see him killing and ordering DCI to abduct people, abuse them, and then on Sunday he's there talking about a verse in the Bible. You almost want to get up like Jesus did and actually go whip people up. Like, that is what I feel like doing. I will be remiss if I let you both go without talking about this, because this is the main reason I wanted you both to come. I mean, I wanted you both, since you're so knowledgeable, to talk about what you have so far. And as we wrap up now, please talk about the work you're doing with the families of those who have been lost in the protests, in the struggle for liberation in Kenya, and those who are in hospital healing from the wounds of the abuse of government, and those who are in hiding, avoiding from being taken by DCI. The fact that we have Kenyans now not worried about the thugs on the street, right? Not worried about the people who are going to come and break into their homes, like legit thugs. They are worried about government entities. That is who Kenyans are scared of today, because that is who is literally breaking the law. So let's talk about the work you're doing in that area with the families of those who were lost, Rex's family and everyone else, please. Let's start with you, NothingKE, and then we'll go to John and we'll wrap up.
Okay. When we were asking where the Kenyan church is, we were expecting them to be the one visiting the sick, burying the dead, consoling the family, agitating for those who are abducted and missing. And we know how that grief looks like. And we purpose to, bring an awareness that we cannot abandon the families, we cannot move on from here. They are political martyrs for a place we call home. So we are doing a fundraiser and we mobilize young people. If it's, say, Rex Masai's home, which will be their first visit, we mobilize people there to go and visit them to go and visit them and condole with them, let them know that we said we will never forget them. We cannot say we will never forget them, and we actually do exactly that. The fact that we are accustomed to people who will make a promise that they will never fall through with, we have decided to be the voices that fall through with that. So we'll be mobilizing for resources, and John will come in and share probably the pay bill number or the phone number we're using to crowdsource for funds, and then we'll mobilize. People don't have to travel. If it's say in Eldoret, we will mobilize the youth in Eldoret, but send the resources to go and stand with those families for them to know that Kenyans stand with them at this time of very complicated grief, very complicated grief.
Why do you call it complicated grief?
It is complicated grief because you cannot explain to a family how their child who was carrying a flag, a phone, and a bottle of water, saying that the finance bill that was drafted by IMF is not fit for them, and you end up with a dead child because they decided to be an active citizen and say no to something that was not right, and then you end up with having to process losing very young lives for things that could have been avoided. I've said this time without number that people should be open to conversation. Kenya is not at war, but clearly it is at war. Where we say something is wrong, the response should not be with guns and with guns and what is it called, tear gas. And it is complicated because the way they died, it was very gruesome. It is going to be a very difficult thing to heal from.
Yeah,
That's why it's complicated grief.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, NothingKE, and continue doing the work that you're doing. John Seremani, please, let me see. All right, okay. So the till number will be available tomorrow. Just let us know, John, what you have currently that we can put up for people to support. So for those of you who are listening today, for those of you who are going, oh, did we lose John? We're going to stay a few minutes as we wait for him to come back on so that he can talk about what's going on and how we can support. But for those of you who listen to this video on recording, for those of you listening now, look out in the chat tomorrow. Once I get that information from John, I will share it with everyone. So please look out in the chat. When we get the information from John, we will go ahead. Okay. We'll go ahead and share it. Yes, you are. So tomorrow, when you send me the information tomorrow, the till number, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat, in the comments of this video, the recording. So everyone can go to the recording of this on our channel, youtube.com/@ampersand Kumbukeni-1. And in the comments that we will have afterwards, you will get the information. I will put it in there. John, please talk about this and how people can support.
Yeah, I think it's a bizarre thing for many people in the West who have never been to Africa or other places to understand how systems, in a place where, let's say, systems don't work, how things run. Because we were here, we talked about colonialism and neocolonialism, and the idea that a simple African citizen who's out to hold their government, like it's a sin, you know, for the natives. That's how they used to call them. For the natives, you know, to come out and assert their rights and ask and dare to ask the government to be accountable. That same mindset that was in the colonial era is still going on, where you are punished with death or the pain of being a cripple for the rest of your life, simply for demanding that Parliament does what it's supposed to do, listen to the people and not pass a law, a punitive law. There are people who will never walk again. You know, there are people who will who have serious health complications, and even worse, of course, there are people who are dead. Many of them in gruesome ways. Some are abducted, tortured, and killed. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. So I think, and even part of my anger is with the church, even with my own church, you know, because they have a lot of hospitals. And I was wondering during the protests, why didn't they open up the hospitals for people for free? They can do that. They have the resources. But anyway, so I think putting all these things together, what we decided to do was to act. And a big chunk of that is to visit the families of the bereaved, to visit with the families of those who and the people who have been injured, and then those who are missing, as we pray with them and seek for their justice.
Yeah.
Because for far too long in Africa, we've how do I say this? We have this habit of forgetfulness, especially of our heroes. Yeah. Where is Sankara's family today? Patrice Lumumba, where is his family? How are they honored in their native countries? You know, there are certain things we need to honor our heroes. We need to remember them. We need to be with their families. If I was president, those guys, or rather, if I was president, of course, they wouldn't have died. But if I was to come in as president, those families would not pay taxes on anything. You know, and would have 25th of June would be a Memorial Day. Something else I realized as I try to wrap this up, I hopped on into Uganda space where they were discussing their own protests. As you know, it's spread to Uganda, Nigeria. And I asked them, do you people also have an Occupy Church movement? They do, but it's very, very minimal. And they've had to come to terms with the fact that even in their own country, the church is being misused by politics and politicians. So I think it goes to every place in Africa. Let us remember our heroes. What we want to do is visit them. We are in contact with the families, and we are setting up our plans for the next 2 to 3 weeks. But as I promised, tomorrow I'll be able to get the till number, and then people can find out how best they can. And as well, you can also follow us on X, wherever we are. Sure, yeah, we'll be able to talk more. Cheers.
Yes, and you can follow.
Allow me to add
please.
on the injured. There are people who need limbs.
Oh my goodness.
And we need to help them be able to get prosthetic limbs, or wheelchairs. There are people who still have bullets launched in their body. Like there's a gentleman who we were fundraising for, and he finally went to hospital to have the bullets removed. There are so many stories that are not talked about, and at the same time, as this work is going on, we have identified people who will cover it. So it's not something that will be done in darkness. There be history, and they be history, and there will also be documented story from the family, from every visit, so that there's no room for anyone to be left out. Every case, if it's the missing, some of that money will help the families go out there and pursue justice. There are people who can't work again. There's a young man who was shot in the head and he lost sight in one eye. He needs surgery. In fact, in his case, I think he will need to be flown outside for treatment. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Like John said, people will one day realize that picketing and complaining is the easiest part. The chaos that is left behind is the hardest part, because that's where the heavy lifting needs to be done. And at the same time, as we visit those families, civic education needs to be done on the ground to eradicate the fear that, I could be a victim of the same, so that even though maybe the movement is not very pronounced at the top, the movement went underground. And we need to support fruition of the underground movement to make sure that every single person in every corner of where these people were affected, those villages know that they lost a son, and for a death that did not have to occur, and for what reason. We need to enlighten them about the ills of World Bank and IMF. We need to educate them about a debt that we are paying for and we don't fully understand. We need to empower their voices to ask the difficult questions without fear. Yeah, so that is part of the work the funds we raise is going to finance. Thank you. If I've left anything else, John, probably you can highlight.
No, you're good. You're spot on. I think, the civic education stuff, you'll be able to find out who is doing what. People like Willie Oeba, Morara Kebaso, Casmuel, Makoure, Wanjira, all these people, they're involved in that work. And it's opening eyes, Again, that's what we need. We need the revolution, both in the street and the revolution that is not televised. We need both of them to work hand in hand.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that, because we have Africans, WanaUbuntu, I call them, because we're moving away from the word African being, that is a Roman man who decided to call us that. So I'm not going along with names that were given to us by colonizers. Oh, goodness, why am I losing my train of thought when I wanted to say something? What was that last thing that you just said, John Seremani?
The revolution that is not televised.
Thank you. Yes, so you hear people all the time talking about the revolution will not be televised. Just because it was said once, it doesn't mean that we have to keep repeating it, especially because our system has changed. In fact, the revolution must be televised today. The revolution must be televised. Why am I saying that? In order to protect our people, in order to defend ourselves from the false narrative that they will create when the revolution is hidden. Because if people don't know what the revolution is doing, these criminals can put up any narrative and people believe it. But if people know 100% what the revolution is doing, people were able to defend the Black Panther because they knew exactly what the Black Panther was doing. Right? People in the locations where the Black Panther was serving them breakfast every morning, feeding their children. Those people knew that no matter what the FBI said about the Black Panther, I know what the Black Panther is doing for me. The Black Panther protected me from being attacked by the police. The Black Panther is feeding my children every morning. So I'm grateful for the work you're doing, everyone. Another thing too in our culture is when you go to people's home to visit, you don't go bare, without anything, right? And that is what also the money will help. When John Seremani, NothingKE, and the team that is working with the families, when they go to these families' home, they need to bring some food. They cannot go empty-handed. So that and all the other needs that they mentioned. So look out again for those of you who are asking, how can I support? I'm seeing what's happening in Kenya. How can I help? Kumbukeni is giving you a direction on how you can help. Tomorrow, look in our comment section on this recording and you will find there information from John Seremani on how you can help. And please do help. Reach out in your pocket if you have the means. Instead of giving money to the church next Sunday, give it to this cause. Because trust me, this cause is serving the will of our Creator more than it is you giving it in church and having that pastor buy a suit or pay for some private jet. Thank you both for coming. I'm looking forward to working with you because I know I will be working with you on the ground and beyond in liberating our nation and our continent and our people globally. Asanteni. You can stay on quickly, NothingKE and John Seremani, as we wrap up. Don't leave yet.